In a world flooded with constant noise, ceaseless availability, and endless options, true power emerges not from showing up everywhere but from vanishing deliberately. Scarcity is a force as ancient as human desire itself. It is the silent architect behind obsession, the invisible thread pulling at the fabric of attention and craving. When you become scarce, you shift from being one among many to becoming the unattainable, the mysterious, the rare prize that commands fixation. This is no mere coincidence or social quirk. It is a deep psychological truth rooted in the mechanisms of human cognition and emotion, a truth that Machiavelli himself understood in his cold, ruthless observations of power and influence. To be scarce is to wield a weapon far more potent than force or persuasion. It is to ignite obsession, to control desire by withholding availability, and thus, to become indispensable in the minds of others. Scarcity is the unseen lever that moves the masses, the secret code embedded in the unconscious that transforms indifference into desperation, and casual acquaintance into relentless pursuit. But why does absence make the heart grow fonder? Why does the mere act of disappearing stoke flames of obsession that no amount of presence can match? The answer lies not in superficial attraction, but in the profound architecture of the human psyche, in the way our brains are wired to value what is rare, to fear loss, and to seek control over what slips beyond reach. In this exploration, we will unravel the dark psychology behind scarcity and obsession, tracing its roots in evolutionary biology, neurochemistry, and Machiavellian strategy. We will see how power, in its most insidious form, is often exercised through disappearance, how control is maintained by mastering the art of absence, and how obsession can be manipulated as a tool to bend wills and secure dominance. This is not a lesson in kindness or transparency, but a ruthless guide to understanding and harnessing the primal forces that govern human attention and desire. Prepare to dive into a world where less is infinitely more, where the spaces you create become your strongest armor, and where the silence you impose speaks louder than words. When you become scarce, they do not simply miss you, they become obsessed. An obsession, as Machiavelli taught us, is the cornerstone of power. Scarcity is not merely a social phenomenon or a cultural trend, it is a fundamental principle etched into the very wiring of the human brain. From the earliest days of our existence, scarcity shaped survival, dictated value, and sculpted desire. When resources were limited, food, shelter, safety, or companionship, those who understood the power of scarcity gained an evolutionary edge. This primal coding remains active deep within us, invisible yet unyielding. At its core, scarcity triggers a psychological response known as the scarcity effect, where items, opportunities, or even people become more desirable simply because they are less available. This is not about objective value or rational calculation, it is about emotional urgency, a compulsion born of fear and longing. When something is scarce, it signals exclusivity, uniqueness, and power. Our minds interpret absence as a sign that what is missing must be precious. After all, if everyone had it, it would lose its allure. Neuroscience reveals how scarcity activates the brain's reward centers, notably the nucleus accumbens, a region tied to pleasure and anticipation. The uncertainty and rarity amplify dopamine production, heightening craving and fixation. This is the biological basis for obsession. The less you have access to something or someone, the more your brain floods with chemicals that fuel desire, not always rational, but intensely compelling. Machiavelli, in his ruthless dissection of human nature, understood this with brutal clarity. Power is never just about possession, it is about control of perception and availability. To be scarce is to be feared and coveted. The crowd chases what slips through its fingers, and the wise manipulator uses scarcity as a psychological lever, deliberately withdrawing, retreating, and disappearing to stoke the flames of obsession in others. Moreover, scarcity taps into the human fear of loss, the psychological phenomenon known as loss aversion. Losing what we have, or the chance to acquire something, hurts twice as much as gaining something of equal value satisfies. When someone becomes scarce, the threat of losing access triggers anxiety and desperation, deepening obsession. The mind races to reclaim what vanishes, even if it was previously taken for granted. Scarcity also manipulates social proof and status dynamics. Rarity implies higher status. If something is difficult to obtain, it signals exclusivity, which increases perceived worth. People naturally want to associate with what is rare and valuable, elevating their own social standing. When you become scarce, you do not just become desired, you become a prize, a status symbol, a mark of distinction others will chase fiercely. In sum, scarcity activates a complex interplay of cognitive biases and emotional responses, anticipation, fear, desire, social status, and loss aversion, all combining to make obsession inevitable. It is a force of nature, ruthless and indifferent, and those who harness it wield power that few can resist. Niccolo Machiavelli, the unflinching observer of human ambition and power, taught that influence is less about brute force and more about the manipulation of perception. In his seminal work, The Prince, he repeatedly illustrated how those who master control over their own presence and absence dictate the desires and fears of others. Scarcity, in this context, is a tool of sovereignty, an instrument that turns fleeting attention into unrelenting obsession. Historically, rulers, generals, and statesmen have wielded scarcity as a form of psychological dominance. Think of monarchs who retreated into seclusion, appearing only in carefully staged ceremonies, cultivating an aura of mystery and untouchability. Their scarcity did not diminish their power, it magnified it exponentially. The public's limited access fueled fascination and reverence, forging loyalty and submission through desire and fear. Machiavelli's brilliance lay in recognizing that people do not chase power in its raw form, they chase the image, the aura, the unattainable ideal. Scarcity, therefore, becomes a performance, a calculated withdrawal that compels others to fill the void with obsession. To be omnipresent is to be ordinary, to be scarce is to be extraordinary. This paradox forms the heart of Machiavellian strategy, vanish to conquer. Moreover, Machiavelli understood the strategic value of unpredictability tied to scarcity. When a leader is consistently available, they become vulnerable, predictable patterns are exploited, power diluted. By contrast, the rare appearance, the sudden disappearance, the ambiguous silence, instills anxiety and speculation. It keeps allies eager and enemies uncertain. Obsession thrives in the fertile ground of mystery. This principle transcends politics. In interpersonal relationships, business, and social hierarchies, scarcity wields the same power. Machiavellian figures have always exploited absence as a means of control, knowing that those who chase are those who can be commanded. They create desire through restraint, obligation through withdrawal. The philosophical underpinning of this approach is simple but profound. Power is less about possession and more about the control of desire. Scarcity is a currency that inflates worth, cultivates loyalty, and compels action. Machiavelli's timeless lesson is that sometimes the greatest act of strength is to become invisible, to transform from a resource constantly available to a prize intensely coveted. Understanding this historical context reveals that scarcity is not a passive state but an active strategy. It is a deliberate manipulation of psychological forces, a chess move in the game of influence. Those who master this art wield a power few recognize but everyone feels, the power to ignite obsession simply by becoming scarce. When scarcity is introduced into the dynamic of human relationships or desires, obsession is not a chance byproduct, it is a near-inevitable response wired deep into the emotional and neurological fabric of the mind. Understanding obsession as a reaction to scarcity requires a journey into the intimate workings of the brain and the emotional circuits that govern attachment, reward, and anxiety. Neurologically, obsession hinges on the interplay of several powerful chemicals, dopamine, serotonin, and cortisol chief among them. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter linked to reward and motivation, spikes dramatically when something desired is scarce or uncertain. This chemical surge produces a sensation of craving so acute that the mind becomes fixated on the object of scarcity, seeking the rewarding release that comes with obtaining or reuniting with it. It is the same mechanism that drives addiction. Scarcity turns desire into a compulsion, obsession into a near-chemical dependency. Simultaneously, serotonin levels often drop during obsession, impairing emotional regulation and increasing anxiety. The imbalance intensifies focus on the scarce object while undermining the ability to maintain a balanced perspective. This neurological storm creates a feedback loop where obsession feeds scarcity, and scarcity fuels obsession, trapping the individual in a cycle difficult to escape. From an emotional perspective, scarcity triggers a profound sense of uncertainty and loss. Humans are inherently wired to seek safety and control, yet scarcity subverts these needs by introducing unpredictability and absence. The emotional response to this is not calm reflection but restless anxiety, a desperate urge to reclaim what is missing. The mind invents stories, rationalizes behaviors, and justifies actions, all in service of resolving the tension scarcity creates. Behaviorally, this emotional and chemical turmoil manifests in relentless pursuit, heightened attention, and compulsive monitoring. Obsession drives people to seek constant information, interpret ambiguous signals, and overanalyze interactions, all in an effort to reduce the painful uncertainty caused by scarcity. This explains why when someone disappears or becomes scarce, the ones left behind often escalate their efforts to reconnect, control, or understand the situation, sometimes to their own detriment. Machiavelli's insight shines here. Obsession is a weapon of control, and scarcity is the trigger. By deliberately cultivating absence, one stokes the fire of fixation in others, transforming casual interest into all-consuming attention. This attention is power because it consumes the mental resources of others, distracting, manipulating, and bending their will. Yet obsession is a double-edged sword. While scarcity ignites desire, it can also breed desperation and irrationality, states that can be exploited but also can spiral beyond control. Understanding the emotional and neurological underpinnings of obsession allows the Machiavellian to not only wield scarcity as a tool but also anticipate the dangerous edges where obsession fractures into chaos. Absence is a paradoxical yet fundamental catalyst in the alchemy of attraction and power. The deliberate act of withdrawing presence, becoming scarce, creates a vacuum that the human mind is compelled to fill. This vacuum transforms simple interest into obsession, casual curiosity into urgent desire, and superficial acquaintance into an emotional battleground. Absence does not merely reduce availability, it reshapes reality itself in the minds of others, amplifying the value of what is missing. In relationships, the power of absence is profound and often underestimated. When someone becomes suddenly or strategically unavailable, they evoke a cascade of psychological responses in those left behind. The mind's default is to fill gaps with intensified longing and speculation. Unanswered messages, unexplained silences, and vanished presences ignite narratives spun from hope, fear, and imagination. The scarcity of interaction makes every small sign or gesture laden with meaning, each contact precious and charged with emotion. Machiavelli's teaching on this is brutally practical. To command others, you must control what they do not have access to. Presence can breed familiarity, and familiarity often breeds contempt or indifference. Absence, however, preserves mystery and desire. It keeps others on edge, eager to win back your attention or approval. It is the masterstroke of influence, turning passivity into pursuit. Beyond personal relationships, absence serves as a weapon in broader social and political arenas. Leaders who retreat from the spotlight on their terms create suspense and speculation that rivals or opponents cannot contain. This unpredictability destabilizes others while solidifying the figure's enigmatic status. The fear of losing a scarce resource or ally becomes a motivator for loyalty, compliance, and even worship. Furthermore, absence shapes the perception of power itself. Power is not just about what you command, it is about what you withhold. By removing yourself from immediate reach, you signal independence and control. You become a prize, not an obligation. The obsessive effort others expend to bridge your absence is a testament to your influence. This principle also applies in business and social dynamics. Brands that limit supply, influencers who cultivate selective engagement, and individuals who vanish from certain social scenes all leverage absence to increase desirability and control. Scarcity creates demand, absence heightens obsession. However, wielding absence as a tool requires subtlety and precision. Too much disappearance breeds forgetfulness and loss, too little leaves desire unsatisfied. The Machiavellian art is balancing presence and absence, disappearing enough to stoke obsession, returning enough to sustain it, and always keeping others uncertain. In this delicate dance, absence is not weakness but strength. It is the silent force that shapes minds, commands hearts, and builds empires of influence. When you disappear on your own terms, you become more than a person, you become an irresistible enigma, a scarce commodity that others cannot stop chasing. While scarcity and the obsession it ignites can be powerful tools of influence and desire, they also harbor a shadow, one where the very fixation scarcity creates can spiral into chaos, harm, and self-destruction. Machiavellian strategy warns us not only of how to wield power but also of the dangers lurking when obsession escapes control. Obsession, fueled by scarcity, can distort reality. The mind, desperate to resolve the tension of absence, constructs fantasies and illusions that far exceed truth. The object of obsession becomes a mythic figure, flawed, idealized, terrifying, or all at once. This distortion undermines rational judgment, pushing individuals to extreme behaviors ranging from passive despair to aggressive pursuit. The person who once held power through absence can become a prisoner of the obsession they inspired, trapped in cycles of expectation and disappointment. Psychologically, obsession rooted in scarcity often breeds anxiety, jealousy, and insecurity. The fear of permanent loss becomes a fixation that overshadows all else. Individuals may become hypervigilant, misinterpret neutral cues as signs of rejection, or resort to manipulation and control to reclaim what has slipped beyond reach. This toxic spiral damages relationships and erodes trust. The Machiavellian understands that obsession is a volatile force. Once unleashed, it can turn allies into enemies and admiration into resentment. Furthermore, when obsession turns destructive, it often attracts other destructive patterns such as stalking, emotional abuse, or self-sabotage. The scarcity that once empowered can become a weapon turned inward or outward, harming all parties involved. Machiavelli's cold pragmatism recognizes that power gained through obsession is fragile. If the object of obsession resists or escapes, the obsessed are left hollow and broken, their energy wasted in futile pursuit. On a societal level, obsession fueled by scarcity can manifest in collective hysteria, cult-like followings, or toxic fandoms where individuals lose their identity and agency. The rare becomes not only desirable but also dangerous, a symbol around which irrational loyalty or hatred coalesces. Here, scarcity manipulates masses, not just individuals, turning obsession into a tool of mass control or chaos. The dark side of obsession also exposes the manipulator's risk. The Machiavellian who plays with scarcity must anticipate the breaking points of obsession and control. There is a fine line between fascination and fixation, between power and vulnerability. If obsession turns destructive, it can backfire, leading to loss of reputation, isolation, or retaliation. Ultimately, scarcity and obsession are forces of immense power but also unpredictable consequence. To wield them wisely requires self-awareness, discipline, and an understanding of human fragility. The Machiavellian knows when to ignite obsession and when to extinguish it before it consumes all. Scarcity is not a passive phenomenon, it is a strategic weapon that, when wielded with precision, grants you unrivaled control over attention, desire, and ultimately, power. The Machiavellian does not wait for scarcity to happen, they engineer it, crafting absence and unavailability to sculpt the psychology of obsession in others. Here are the core tactics that transform scarcity from abstract concept into a tool of dominance. First, master your availability with intention. Do not be perpetually present or easily accessible. Instead, create deliberate patterns of appearance and withdrawal. This unpredictability keeps others off balance and hungry for your attention. When you vanish without warning or explanation, you ignite curiosity and anxiety, forcing others to chase your presence. But beware, too much unpredictability risks alienation. The key is to balance scarcity with enough return to sustain desire and maintain relevance. Second, cultivate an aura of mystery. Reveal just enough to intrigue but never enough to satisfy curiosity fully. Share selective information about yourself or your intentions, but guard your inner world fiercely. Mystery breeds speculation and projection, which fuels obsession. People will fill the gaps with their desires and fears, amplifying their fixation on you. Third, use social proof to enhance perceived scarcity. The more others value you or compete for your attention, the more scarce and desirable you become. This can be done subtly, being seen with influential figures, having your time sought after, or simply maintaining an image of exclusivity. Scarcity paired with social proof multiplies obsession because it activates competitive instincts and social status drives. Fourth, avoid overcommunication. In the era of instant messaging and constant connection, restraint is revolutionary. Limit your responses, delay replies strategically, and avoid over-explaining your absence. Silence speaks louder than words and creates space for others to obsess. Over-communication diminishes scarcity and breeds complacency. Fifth, leverage deadlines and time limits. When something is available only for a limited window, whether your attention, an offer, or an opportunity, it becomes exponentially more valuable. The ticking clock intensifies desire and compels immediate action, heightening the urgency that scarcity generates. Sixth, manage your reactions carefully. Never appear desperate or eager to be found. Obsession thrives on perceived control and power, so maintain a calm, detached demeanor. Let others show their fixation, your composure becomes a mirror reflecting their need. Seventh, create experiences that imprint emotionally. Scarcity combined with intense emotional moments forms lasting memories that deepen obsession. Brief but powerful interactions linger in the mind longer than constant, mundane presence. Make your limited availability unforgettable. Finally, know when to disappear completely. Sometimes, the ultimate act of scarcity is total vanishing, removing yourself entirely from the equation to reset dynamics and ignite fresh obsession. This is a high-stakes tactic requiring timing and confidence, for disappearance invites either pursuit or forgetting. These tactics form a Machiavellian blueprint to transform scarcity into obsession, and obsession into control. The mastery lies in the subtlety, the restraint, and the ruthless calculation of human psychology. When applied with skill, scarcity is your most potent weapon to command attention, manipulate desire, and secure power without force. While wielding scarcity to ignite obsession in others can grant you formidable influence, the reverse is equally perilous. To become scarce is to invite fixation, but to be the object of obsession without control over it is to become a prisoner of others' desires. The Machiavellian mind must not only master the art of scarcity but also safeguard against losing sovereignty to those consumed by their own fixation. First, recognize the warning signs of unhealthy obsession directed at you: relentless demands for attention, emotional manipulation, attempts to control your availability, or invasive behaviors. Obsession can quickly morph into entitlement, a belief that your presence or approval is owed rather than earned. Maintaining boundaries is not only a defense but an act of power. Second, cultivate emotional detachment. This does not mean cruelty but a clear-eyed awareness of how obsession distorts reality. Avoid engaging in the cycles of chasing validation or appeasing fixation. When you react emotionally to obsession, you reinforce it. Instead, observe it with calmness, refusing to feed the compulsion. Third, maintain control over your own scarcity. Do not allow others to dictate your availability or force your hand through pressure. Scarcity is most powerful when it is your choice, not theirs. If others attempt to break your scarcity through demands or manipulation, reinforce your boundaries with consistency and resolve. Fourth, develop a support system or network outside the sphere of obsession. Isolation heightens vulnerability. When you have trusted allies or structures, you are less likely to be overwhelmed or coerced by fixated individuals. This network serves as both shield and perspective. Fifth, understand that obsession often masks deeper needs, fear, insecurity, or lack of control in the obsessed individual. While not your responsibility to heal others, recognizing these roots helps you anticipate behaviors and avoid reactive entanglement. Sixth, if obsession escalates toward harassment or danger, take decisive protective actions. Legal measures, distance, and firm boundaries are necessary when obsession crosses into coercion or abuse. Machiavelli's pragmatism demands survival above all else. Seventh, cultivate your own mental and emotional resilience. Practices such as mindfulness, self-reflection, and psychological insight fortify your ability to stay grounded and sovereign amid others' emotional storms. Lastly, remember that power is not simply in being desired, it is in choosing when and by whom you are desired. To lose control of your scarcity is to lose power itself. Obsession is a double-edged sword, wield it carefully, but never become its victim. In mastering scarcity, the Machiavellian mind walks a razor's edge, igniting obsession while preserving freedom. The balance between influence and autonomy is the ultimate prize. Scarcity and obsession are intertwined forces that shape the deepest layers of human behavior, desire, and power. As Machiavelli so profoundly understood, true mastery lies not in mere possession or visibility but in the strategic manipulation of presence and absence. The act of becoming scarce is a deliberate, calculated move that triggers obsession, a psychological fire that consumes attention, fuels desire, and ultimately secures influence. The first truth is that scarcity is a choice, not a circumstance. Those who succeed in making others obsessed do not stumble into scarcity by accident, they create it through control, restraint, and timing. They understand that constant availability breeds familiarity, which dulls desire and erodes power. To become scarce is to reclaim agency over your value and presence. Second, obsession is a form of power over the mind of others. It monopolizes their thoughts and emotions, distracting and disarming them. But this power is fragile. It depends on maintaining the illusion of scarcity and the tension it creates. Once scarcity fades or becomes predictable, obsession dissipates, and so does control. Third, scarcity and obsession are deeply rooted in primal fears: fear of loss, fear of exclusion, fear of uncertainty. These fears amplify desire and compel action. A Machiavellian harnesses these fears, not through cruelty but through psychological precision, turning absence into leverage and desire into obedience. Fourth, balance is essential. Too little scarcity and you become ordinary, too much and you risk being forgotten. Too much obsession can lead to desperation and chaos, too little leaves you powerless. The wise manipulate scarcity to sustain healthy obsession, enough to captivate but not consume. Fifth, scarcity is not static, it must evolve. In a world that demands constant stimulation and instant gratification, maintaining scarcity requires adaptability and awareness. It involves reading the shifting tides of attention, cultural trends, and individual psychology to know when to appear, when to withdraw, and how to remain indispensable. Sixth, scarcity transcends domains. Whether in love, friendship, business, or politics, the principles remain consistent. Those who master scarcity create desire and secure loyalty. Those who fail become invisible, irrelevant, and forgotten. Finally, the ultimate Machiavellian truth: power lies in the control of desire, and desire is fueled by scarcity. To make others obsessed is to own their focus, their emotions, their will. To become scarce is to become a force they cannot resist, a force that terrifies, fascinates, and commands. In this dance of presence and absence, you hold the reins. You decide when to be seen and when to disappear. You sculpt obsession with your silence, control with your distance, and dominance with your scarcity. When you become scarce, they do not simply notice you, they become obsessed. An obsession is the language of power.